Armed non-state actors, born from civil wars and regional conflicts, have become pivotal in shaping proxy alliances and affecting political stability. Traditionally using irregular military methods, these groups are now shifting tactics by exploiting emerging technologies, particularly dual-use innovations. The Houthis have embodied this trend in the Red Sea, demonstrating the disruptive impact of advanced weaponry on regional and global stability. How have armed non-state actors diversified their arsenals to include more advanced technological weapon systems? What implications do the shift in tactics have for the broader spectrum of regional and international security? And how can state actors effectively preempt and counter these evolving threats?
Good evening. On behalf of His Excellency Dr. Sultan Mohammed Al-Naimi, the Director General of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, I'd like to thank you all for joining us in this evening webinar, Future Warfare, the Technological Edge of Non-State Actors and Potential Countermeasures. I'm your host, Dr. Al-Aoudat, an expert in advanced sciences and artificial intelligence at the center. I'd like very much to welcome our distinguished speakers, Dr. Samir Patel and Dr. Jean-Marc. Dr. Patel is the Director of Center for Security Strategy and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation in India. And Dr. Rickley is the Head of Global and Emerging Risks and the founder and director of the Polymath Initiative at the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Switzerland. He's also the co-chair of the NATO Partnership for Peace Consortium Emerging Security Challenges Working Group and the co-curator of the International Security Map of the Strategic Intelligence Platform of the World Economic Forum. Now, in this webinar, we will delve into exploring the implications of exploiting non-state actors to dual-use technologies and the potential countermeasures to prevent or at least alleviate any potential threats. Let me start by the following question, Dr. Rickley. To set the ontology of this webinar or as our basic framework for understanding. Geneva Call, the organization defines an armed non-state actor as the following. Any armed actor with a basic structure of command operating outside state control that uses force to achieve its political or allegedly political objectives. How can we understand this force, the meaning of force, in relation to technology?
Right. So I think what we have to understand is the nature of current technological development that is fundamentally different from what happened in the past. Most technological innovation these days rely on digitalization. So the first thing that comes to your mind probably is AI. But there are also other development in the field of additive manufacturing, neurotechnologies, or a synthetic bio. And digital technologies basically permeates all of these different technology, including emitter robotics. So what happens with this technology is that once a specific software has been developed, it's almost impossible to contain its proliferation because you cannot contain the proliferation of lines of code. And so what we see is that the pace of democratization of technology is very rapid. And therefore, when technology that is potentially very powerful gets in the hands of non-state actors that have nefarious goals or wants to use them for malicious intent, then you end up with a situation that is becoming quickly a security challenge. So therefore, the current era is definitely marked by this democratization of power to non-state actors, but I would say increasingly also to single individuals. And in the future, increasingly also we'll have to rely on autonomous machine being able also to have a security implication.
Thank you, Dr. Oakley. Just based on what you have mentioned, Dr. Patel, also to extend our understanding, how such non-state actors diversify their skills to exploit almost every emerging technology.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to come and speak. Thank you to the ECSSR team. I think first question that we need to understand is what is a non-state actor, right? And I think here, even though there is a fairly prevalent definition of non-state actor, the fundamental difference that I would like to draw is that every non-state actor of consequence, every non-state actor which has the capacity to engage in large-scale violence receives some kind of a state support or some kind of state patronage. If you look at, for instance, Al-Qaeda, if you look at, for instance, the Lazarus group, which is famous for committing cyber crimes, all of these groups, non-state actors, but they have received some kind of support from the state actors, or at least some kind of patronage from one of the elements of the state. So what that means is that many of these non-state actors also act as proxies for the state actors, which means more often than not, they are actually one of the tools to pursue and realize the geopolitical ambitions, the geopolitical rivalries of the state actors, which means in order to pursue those geopolitical rivalries or ambitions, sometimes the access of these so-called non-state actors to some of these advanced or emerging technologies or critical technologies becomes much easier, right? That's one. So for instance, if you look at, for instance, the acquisition of the drone systems, if you look at, for instance, in case of South Asia, the kind of access and the kind of technologies and the drone systems which some of the non-state actors, some of the terrorist organizations are getting, it clearly shows that there is some kind of state support in ensuring that they get access to these technologies. That's one. I think second way that these non-state actors are getting access is because, as even Dr. Mark said, the fact is that many of these are dual-use technologies, and the fact is that these are commercially available technologies, which means you can actually go in a shop and buy these products, which means they can be easily procured, and therefore that gives them that access to some of these advanced technologies. And third, which is in a sense often understated, is actually what is happening on the darknet, on the digital black markets or darknet marketplaces. I think again, these have proved to be extremely thriving markets, black markets, for getting access to some of these technologies. And this is particularly true for cyberspace, because you have access to all kinds of malicious software, some viruses, malwares, ransomwares, which you can get access to from these darknet marketplaces. What that means is that the threshold in terms of entry into getting access to some of these technologies has lowered, because of the dual nature of these technologies and because of the patronage that some of these non-state actors receive on behalf of the state actors. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mr. Patel. So numerous risks are posed by NSAs, non-state actors, use of commercially available technologies, as you said. I'm thinking of a particular like artificial intelligence, as Dr. correctly mentioned, neurotechnologies, biotechnologies, 3D printing, which allow such entities, to conduct an attack to be disproportionately lower than the cost of defending against one. So, Dr. Rickley, any thoughts on how to solve this dual-use conundrum that's been faced by governments? Thank you.
That's a good question, and this is a major strategic challenge for traditional armed forces. I agree with what Dr. Patel said, that the cost of entry to this technology has lowered dramatically, and democratization. I also agree that most non-state actors are very often supported by governments. There are a few, for instance, ISIS. It's very more difficult to make a case that ISIS was supported by a government. And so it changes also the access to type of technology. Obviously, if you look at the Houthis that are supported by Iran, they do have access to a missile technology that is a group that wouldn't have access to the capability of Iran would not have. Nonetheless, because of this dual-use nature of this technology that are commercially now available, these create a real problem, and we can see that in Ukraine. We can see that also in Gaza. If you think about the cost it cost to develop drones and the price of, for instance, the Iron Dome system, there is a huge asymmetry between the cost of the rocket that is being fired by Hezbollah or Hamas and the cost of the missiles that will actually be used by Israel. So increasingly, what we will see saturation attack. I mean, the April attack of Iran against Israel, in a way, was interesting because it allowed the Iranian and others to understand how much rockets and missiles you need to saturate the system. And I can probably bet that the next time there will be an attack in the Unman system, this will be lessons that will be learned. And the issue here is that because of this asymmetry between the cost of defense and the cost of offense, the cost of defense is much higher. What you can do over time is just exhaust your adversary because it's much cheaper to attack than to respond. We can also see that in Ukraine. If you look at the price of drones versus the price of tanks, you have platforms that are now commercially available that are able, fitted with explosive, able to neutralize a tank, a multi-million weapon. So there is this asymmetry, and these problems will become increasingly challenging in the future, to the point that some militaries now are asking, should we really invest, for instance, in developing a new aircraft carrier, bearing in mind the cost associated with that, compared to if you think about you could develop drones, maritime drones that could actually swarm, entire aircraft carrier group in a much cheaper way than it would take to defend it. So the solution to that is not easy, and obviously it has to do with thinking about how we can counter these different systems. But the other issue here is that there are no limitation to human ingenuity. And very often, and we've seen that, for instance, with ISIS during the 2010s, ISIS was very innovative. It was the first organization that understood how to militarize social media by using the virality of social media with the ultra-violence of decapitation execution videos. And that had a huge impact on the morale of the soldier on the battlefield. And so for the anti-ISIS coalition to counter that, it took a very long time to understand the mechanism, of how it spreads on social media. So the problem here is really to always look at any time between the offender and the defender, who has the upper hand. And in the digital domain, it looks like it's always the offensive. Your antivirus is as good as the latest virus that has been detected. All the what we call zero-day vulnerabilities, so these are malware that have not been identified, can actually go through. Your antivirus will not detect them. So this asymmetry is a major problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rakli. As you mentioned, non-state actors have long engaged in asymmetrical warfare. And such groups are continuously, shifting their tactics toward exploiting whatever emerging technology. So, Dr. Patel, specifically for conventional military forces, what challenges do such novel tactics or shifting in tactics impose?
So I think one major challenge for the conventional militaries is the fact that even though they are giving access to the non-state actors or their proxies to some of these technologies, as has been seen in case of many terrorist organizations and some of the proxies, after a point, once the non-state actor becomes too powerful, it is difficult to rein them in, right? And I think that's a major challenge for the conventional militaries, and we have seen it, playing out in multiple contexts. The second challenge, I think, is also the fact that with the access to the advanced and emerging technologies, the risk appetite for both the parties, the state actors and the non-state actors, and if I may add the third party, the rival adversarial state or a non-state actor, there are different degrees of increase and decrease that we are seeing. Okay, so on one hand, you would see, for instance, if you're getting access to technologies such as, for instance, artificial intelligence or, for instance, cyberspace, you would actually, the conventional militaries would actually prefer to play it out safe and engage in non-kinetic, non-contact warfare, right? Because you can actually no longer want to send your soldiers or troops into the battlefield, and you can just engage in this so-called virtual or physical, the non-physical battle space, and you can pursue your geopolitical rivalries. But on the other hand, you're also seeing the risk appetite for some of the states to undertake violence increasing, precisely because they are no longer facing the risk of the troops' casualties. So if human resources is your most valuable resource in the warfare, if your troops and soldiers are the most valuable resource, okay, once you remove that particular element from the battlefield dynamics, you can just send armies of soldiers, armies of robots. You can send swarm drones, right? And you can face the losses because it is not actually translating into human casualties. So in that sense, the challenge now for some of the conventional military is that for some of the rival states, it is increasing their appetite for violence. And as Dr. Mark said, I think that the offense defense balance, which was precariously being maintained in the previous years, that is now being impaired because of these emerging tech challenges.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patel. Just to all our audience who have just joined us, my name is Dr. Anas, and I'm this evening with Dr. Samir Patel and Dr. Jean-Marc to discuss future warfare, the technological age, non-state actors, and potential countermeasures. So, Dr. Reckley, if I may, according to the UN Institute of Disarmament Research, there are currently over 65 non-state actors who are known to possess drones. And as you mentioned earlier, the number continues to rise unchecked, unfortunately. What can be done by international community to prevent the proliferation of civilian-grade drones, especially the move of such actors to swarm tactics, as you said, would certainly represent an escalating global security concern?
Well, it's very difficult because, as mentioned earlier, these technology are dual use. They are commercially available. So you have to take different type of measures if you want to prevent the proliferation and reduce the risk of malicious actors using this type of technology. One has to do with operational issues, trying to be able to counter drone on the battlefield. And there are lots of research into that. It could be into electro-optic mechanism. It could be about jamming. It could be about interception. It's about distraction. But so far, we haven't seen a system that is able to cover the entire range of drones that are out there. So this is, if you want, a kind of strategic operational issue. Then there is the issue, of course, of the governance of this technology. And a commercial drone that is being used for monitoring crops, for instance, or monitoring poaching, can also be used, to monitor adversaries on the battlefield. So it's very difficult to prevent the monitoring of poaching, but we would like to have ways to control drones that are being used for the military. So there, what you have to work on is a system is to work on the governance of these technologies that where those who manufacture these drones are are being basically aware, which they are already, but you have to work hand in hand in order to develop a system of governance that would prevent, I'm not so much talking here about drones, but more development in AI technologies, the most nefarious uses of this technology. Then you face another problem. And if you look at the current war in Ukraine, the Ukrainians are facing a imbalance with the Russian soldiers. So one way that they try to compensate for that is through technology, and for the Ukrainian trying to curb, if you want, this technological development is a nonsense. As a matter of fact, they do exactly the opposite. They are developing a lot of new technologies. They are now testing autonomous drones on the battlefield, and you also have venture capitalist money that is investing in Ukrainian companies because, frankly speaking, Ukraine is a huge laboratory for development of these drones, and there is money also to be made. So trying to curb development and proliferation of these drones, I think, is impossible. So you have to look for other solutions, which have to do with trying to find a system that are able to counter these drones.
Correctly, but if Dr. Patel, it come a bit surprised, because so many drones, like what would be called adversaries to the United States, they do have, Western components, even, components from the United States. So how such entities end up with such components? Is there a black market, as you said earlier, the dark web? So what are the means or the channels that they get such hands-on such components for the drones?
So definitely both physical as well as digital black markets have played a great role in the proliferation of these technologies, including some of the spare parts and the components. But as Dr. Mark said, it's also the ingenuity. I think that is something ingenuity of the non-state actors in terms of ensuring that a product which can be used for completely harmless purpose can be engineered to be used for malicious purposes. Okay, and I'll give you, for instance, because we're talking of the drones, one specific example from South Asia, where in case of India, for instance, like for instance, on India's western borders, we have seen the use of the commercial DJI drones for drug smuggling. Now, traditionally speaking, we have seen that these drones are micro drones, so they are not really capable of carrying larger payloads. But terrorist organizations with some kind of state support have actually re-engineered some of these devices to carry higher payloads, as well as ensure that they escape some of the counter drone mechanisms and systems which have been put by the Indian security forces on India, Pakistan, or India's western borders. Which means, that even as they are getting access to these drones from the commercial markets as well as the black markets, it is their ingenuity which is helping them, their malicious intentions, which is really helping them to convert these into something which will be a completely new product, and that can cause the harm. Similarly, for instance, if you look at, for instance, the social media platforms again, right? I mean, social media platforms we have been using for a longer period, for much longer period. But who would have thought, that an encrypted group on a social media platform or an encrypted chat room can be utilized for radicalization and propaganda purposes, right? So in that sense, again, these are widely used commercially available platforms and technologies, but the ingenuity of these non-state actors is actually driving some of the innovations in terms of utilizing these technologies. And I think that is where, for instance, one big difference is there, that at the beginning, as I said, that the fact is that the state actors are using the non-state actors and proxies. I think one of the major reasons for that is obviously to maintain deniability or escape accountability, but I think it's also the fact that these non-state actors have proved to be much more innovative than the state actors in utilizing these technologies. So it's a combination of many factors which, in a sense, allows them to get access to these technologies and utilize for malicious purposes.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. If I may, you mentioned, along with Dr. Reckley, a couple of really issues of concern. If I can, put some focus on one of them is the Houthis, the sabotaging CIT cables, which previously seems very impossible to relatively non-sophisticated, non-state actor like the Houthis to do so. But now they are perfectly within their reach to do separate technologies. So, Dr. Reckley, how can the international community respond should such actions heighten in the future? Taking into consideration that, CIT cables, they carry on the international trade and around $10 trillion in transactions daily. So how can we respond?
Sure. I mean, here a perfect example where non-state actors, underdogs, are having a huge impact because undersea cable are responsible for 95% of worldwide internet traffic. So therefore, these are choke points. Now, if you are able to attack this choke point, you have a massive impact. And this is basically what you want to achieve. Strategically, if you want to have impact, this is what you want. You want to attack. You don't want to attack tanks, because basically if you destroy one tank, it's one tank less. But if you are able to disable completely how the communication between two continents, for instance, you have a massive impact. And so here, what is important is that these technologies, as you mentioned earlier, provides capabilities that were not possible to have in the past for non-state actors, and are now becoming possible to have. So that means also that we need, we states and institution needs to rethink also resilience. As an institution, you have to identify your center of gravity, and these center of gravities are the function that if you lose them, you are basically grounded, or you can basically collapse. So if we take undersea cable, these are center of gravity, your center of gravity. Think about, cutting an entire continent from the wet, the impact it will have on, or even a country from the wet, the impact it will have on this country. Unfortunately, the technologies that are able to lead to such outcome are also democratizing, because basically underwater drones, unmanned underwater drones now are also democratizing, proliferating, and you can equip them obviously with capabilities to cut this cable. So it's about resilience. Institutions need to think about resilience, and resilience is never given. It is evolving constantly. First, you have to identify this choke point, this center of gravity, and then you have to adapt your mitigation measures with development of potential threat and technology.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reckley. Dr. Patel, do you think that because these cables, they run on the subsea cables, not that depth, I believe the most depth that cable reached was near from an Italian company around 2,000 meters, but they usually have around 100 meters and so on. But what can stop, other non-state actors rather than the Houthis, to mimic what Houthis did in the Red Sea, around the world? It's just very attractive, very target, for any non-state actor. So what do you think, Dr. Patel?
So I think, the same vulnerability that Dr. Mark was talking about, that we are dependent on the data traffic of these submarine cables. I'm pretty sure the same vulnerability even some of the non-state actors have. So, for instance, the Houthi rebels, may not be that much dependent in terms of the internet traffic, and therefore can think of causing that kind of damage and to engage in that kind of sabotage. But for many terrorist organizations, internet is like their oxygen, right? Because it gives them the publicity, it gives them the avenues of fundraising, it gives them the opportunities for recruitment. So by engaging in that kind of sabotage, they are also impairing their own ability to perpetuate their activities. So that, in a sense, I think would be one of the major considerations when they think of engaging in this kind of sabotage, and which may prevent them. But I think for the other non-state actors which are not so dependent on the information and communications technologies, probably it's just a matter of time, and also probably it's a matter of, again, access to some of the even the primitive technologies to go and do that kind of damage, which is probably withholding. But I think, knowing how, for instance, the Houthi rebels have been able to do that kind of damage, it is just a matter of time before other non-state actors think of doing such kind of sabotage.
Hopefully not, but so let me get back to a couple of points you've mentioned earlier, Dr. Rekla and Dr. Patel. Especially related to the conflict in Ukraine, which has proven that the pace of warfare has changed forever. It has become a technological arms race underpinned by cyber attacks, weaponization of disinformation. So, Dr. Berkeley, how big a threat is AI in the context of non-state actors?
Well, AI is proliferating very rapidly. You also have to be mindful about the hype with AI. But I would say that if we look at this emerging tech, currently you have 4 technologies that are being weaponized and used by non-state actors. You have AI, you have digital platforms, you have drones, and you have additive manufacturing. In the future, probably you will need to factor in immersive technology, metaverses. We'll need to factor in synthetic biology and probably also neuro technology. Now, when it comes to AI can be used in a lot of different ways. It could be used by these actors as what I call analytical enabler. The big advantage of AI is that it is able to digest a number of data that no human can and infer from these troves of data, specific observation. So that could be used. In the field of disinformation, especially with developments in generative artificial intelligence, we are now witnessing a lot of instances of Gen AI being used to create deepfakes, to create videos that never existed. For instance, in the war in Gaza, you have a famous picture of a baby in the rebels, allegedly in the rebels of Gaza, that has been, extensively used on social media. It was even published on the front page of Libération, a French newspaper, and that was a deepfake. So this is already there, and it's not just available to non-state actors, it's available to anyone. So the use of AI to impersonate someone else or to create narratives that are fake on a 24-hour basis is already out there. Then AI can also be used for fraud and to collect money, by engineering better social engineering mechanism to trick people. And with development of ChatGPT, generative AI, increasingly Gen AI is also really good at coding. So it is also possible now for even individuals to actually use Gen AI to develop malware that are very advanced, that can evade some detection technique. And then obviously you can have AI combined with drones, for instance, and we are already witnessing that. I mean, the holy grail, if you want, is swarms. swarms of autonomous drones that could be able to conduct facial recognition or object recognition. We are not yet there, but increasingly we are getting there. And as again, if you want to look at where we're going, I mean, watch really carefully what happens currently in Ukraine, because here you have a lot of technological innovation in that space. And in the future, what you also have to factor in is really the cooperation, what I call the combinatorial effects of emerging technology. If you combine AI with, for instance, synthetic biology, then you start to have something which is completely new. You have to start thinking about a machine being able to come up with a new pathogen in terms of the structure, and then increasingly also being able to manufacture this pathogen through DNA synthesis. We are not yet there, but this is where I was mentioning earlier in terms of the industry, where we have to be very careful on some of this technology. We have the international governments and international community has to work very closely with some of this manufacturer that develop this technology, because they are really, really powerful. And it's one thing to use social media to spread this information. It's another to use AI or synthetic biology to engineer new pathogens that nature has never encountered in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Rackley. There've been news from being confirmed from American security agencies that some APTs, advanced persistent threat groups, have been exploiting ChatGPT, in order to interfere or influence the presidential campaigns for Harris and Trump. So, Dr. Patel, how do you see the future? Where we can, when Gen AI, as Dr. Rackley mentioned, be utilized or exploited for, in cyber attacks? Will we reach such stage in the future?
So what you mentioned about the utilization of generative AI, especially for the propaganda purpose, I think it's really what should I say, a specter, primarily because that at the heart of the propaganda is the belief that what you're seeing is genuine, right? And if you cut that belief, right, then everything that you see, you start developing skepticism or doubts about it. And I think that is what the fundamental threat of the generative AI, especially in terms of the propaganda and the synthetic material, is that if you no longer believe that the reality that we're seeing is a reality, right, it can have multiple domino effects. For instance, you start thinking about what could be the actual truth. So are you, for instance, as Dr. Mark was saying, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, for instance, you had these deep fake videos of President Putin and President Zelensky talking about the surrender of Russia or the surrender of Ukraine. That in a sense created the fog of war. Now, the fog of war is a concept which means that you are in a sense not exactly sure of what is happening on the battlefield. But I think with the generative AI and with the deep fake and the propaganda that will be spawned out of it, I think you will see the fog of war becoming the fog of life. That in a sense, that you will no longer be sure of what kind of reality you are seeing and whether and how to really trust that reality. And that in a sense, will in a sense generate the baser human instincts of violence, of engaging in anarchical behavior. And I think that's the biggest threat that you would see from the use of the generative. And I think that I think especially in cyberspace, and that I think is the biggest threat.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. Dr. Rackley, you mentioned that about maybe we might witness in the future, synthesized pathogen, maybe more advanced bio weapon by non-state actors. But earlier, Dr. Patel mentioned that gaining skills must happen by the support of some state, except for some examples like ISIS. Do you think, Dr. Rackley, that we will witness some non-state actor be capable of developing synthesized bioweapon in the future? Because this is like a capability only some countries have. So What
Yeah.
about the non?
It's a good question. I hope not. But now you have to look at the weak signals, you know, and if you do foresight, what you look at are you look at the driving force, if you want, and the weak signals. The driving force are easy to identify. It's democratization of technology. It's democratization of power, increase geopolitical rivalry. Now, in terms of the weak signals, of course, it still requires skills to develop a new pathogen or a chemical weapons. But increasingly also these days, you have no companies that are in the business also of synthetic DNA production, for instance. And now with Gen AI, if you want the skills that were thought in the past being, you know, only in the hands of specialists, of biologists, now are basically filled by some algorithm. You know, a study last year was conducted where a MIT professor, Kamin Asphalt, tasked 4 of his undergraduate students to use ChatGPT to discover new pathogens, and in an hour, 4 new pathogens were discovered, and ChatGPT was also giving indication about where this could be synthesized. So therefore, we have to be really careful, because I think we should also refer to ISIS. As I mentioned earlier, ISIS innovated 3 times at least during its tenure in the caliphate. First, it was the first organization to understand how to weaponize social media. Second, it was the first non-state actor groups that developed an active chemical weapons programs with human trials as guinea pigs in Mosul with the delivery means. And they used chemical weapons, mostly chlorine and mustard gas, on 72 recorded location and cases. And thirdly, they used drones and bought at the time DJI commercial drones, replaced the camera with small hand grenades. And during the Battle of Mosul, up to 30 Iraqi soldiers lost their life on a weekly basis. It was the first time the non-state actor groups got a tactical air supremacy on a governmental actors. So obviously, I wish non-state actors would not get access to this technology, but hope is not a strategy, you know, and therefore, if you look at the weak signals, if you are I should say serious in the field of security, you need to take into account this development, and you need to anticipate how malicious actor, if they have access to this technology, could actually weaponize this technology. And when you start to merge synthetic biology with AI, then you start to come up with really, really dystopic scenarios. And therefore, this is why it is important for the people, the experts in biotech, to take this problem seriously. Some of them are already looking at that, and to develop technology where you have safeguards that are embedded, you know, and where there is a very strong governance system that will try to prevent. And as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Patil, for some of this technology, what we have to do is increase the cost of entry, because if you increase this cost of entry, you eliminate already a lot of factors. Then you are still faced with those who are really willing to do arms. And for that, you need other techniques that have to do also with intelligence and identifying these people and neutralizing them before they use this technology.
And thank you, Dr. Wickley. If I may, Dr. Patel, you know, been focusing on drones, but you know, for unmanned systems, we have you know, ground robots, underwater unmanned vehicles. So, how do you perceive the threats of such systems in the future? You know, with a ground robot, I can, God forbid, send it to a train full of innocent passengers. So, how do you see the threats in the scene of non-state actors in the future?
So, as Dr. Mark was saying, right now we have not really seen the fully autonomous systems, but we are, in a sense, speedily progressing towards that. So if imagine, for instance, as you have been saying, that imagine a swarm of robots, engaging in mass casualty blast, right? So that, in a sense, is the kind of future that we are talking about. In a sense, and it achieves multiple things. It, in a sense, gives you the element of deniability, because you cannot really be sure as to who really sent that swarm, okay, depending on the circumstances and the context. Second is, you can actually engage in that kind of violence without incurring any kind of, in a sense, a prohibitive cost, and therefore achieve the same effect as a conventional military campaign would achieve. And I think, those are really two good enough advantages for the malicious actors, both state as well as non-state actors, to start thinking about these kind of technology, these kind of systems to be used in the swarm formations. And I think the fact, that the way AI is developing today, it is not a distant reality. It is a sense, you will see these kind of things happening in the next 2-3 years. We're already seeing, for instance, some of the British robots, for instance, being used, the British dogs robot being used in the Ukraine theater. So even if you take away some of the sensational elements from those news headlines, the fact is that just the intention is there, means that you will soon see these kind of things happening either in the battlefield or in the civilian space.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. If I may, our distinguished speakers, I'll open the floor for a couple of questions from our audience. I do have one question here. It says, what are the security challenges associated with advanced weapons in the hands of non-state actors, such as laser weapons or electromagnetic weapons? So the floor is yours if anyone wants to answer, Dr. Patel or Dr. Patel.
Well, in terms of lasers, I don't think that's the kind of weapons that are now they proliferate the most. So what we witness in terms of lasers are, commercially available lasers that are being used to blind pilots, for instance. If you can, there were instances, I think, in Israel where some pilots were blinded by that. So this could be, if you want, a current use. In terms of electronic or magnetic weapons, if it is referred to EMPs, electronic magnetic pulse weapons, these are nuclear weapons that you detonate in the higher sphere of the atmosphere, and the electrons that are being released grill any electronic circuit that is out there, and basically you go back to the Stone Age. As I was mentioning earlier, the difference between emerging tech that relies on digital technologies and nuclear technology is access to technology. To develop a nuclear weapons, it is visible. You need the material, you need to refine uranium, and it's a very long process that requires a lot of skills, and basically you cannot. It's very difficult to hide it. So there has been attempts in the past of non-state actors trying to get access to nuclear weapons. I think ISIS at one point tried, but the operation were foiled by police and security services. The big threat out there in terms of non-state actors using nuclear weapons are radiological weapons. So available nuclear materials for medical uses that you use and detonate in a conventional bomb, and basically you are polluting an area. So again, if you think that a terrorist will always think in a way that what is the cheapest way or the easiest way to commit my act. The reason why we're still witnessing today a terrorist using knives or using cars to ram people is that it's easily available. Nuclear technology is not. Now, the issue with this emerging tech is that they are also now becoming really, really available, and this is where the problem starts to be compounded and become really, really, really tricky.
Thank you, Dr. Rickley. I have actually a couple of really interesting questions, but try to grab as many as we could as time permits. Dr. Patel, one of the questions, as access to space becomes more democratized, how might non-state actors leverage satellites, or other space-based technologies for their own agendas?
So I would actually disagree with the question. I think the access to some of the space technologies is still, not exactly affordable, as Dr. Mark has been saying, because it is still, in a sense, the technology which is primarily held by the state actors, but also some of the powerful tech corporations which have interest in not proliferating that technology to the malicious non-state actors. I think, and I should say, that I hope I'm not proved wrong, but I think the intentions of both the state actors which possess these kind of space capabilities and the tech corporations, in a sense align with the idea, that the technology should remain with them. But I think the other way that non-state actors can look at this is actually, for instance, jamming some of these satellites, jamming, for instance, the navigation signals, and therefore having the domino effect. For instance, if you jam the navigation systems, you can actually disable, for instance, with the flight paths as well as some of the other navigation technologies. So I think that is one way that probably the non-state actors are looking at it. Because I think there's a lot of ingenuity which will be shown by the non-state actors. For instance, if you look at, for instance, the use of drones, right? Knowing fully fact that now the security agencies are now utilizing the counter drone technologies, especially in terms of jamming the frequencies of the drones and those kind of things. The terrorist organizations and the non-state actors are now looking at drones which can evade those jamming techniques. So there is a lot of ingenuity which is involved, so I think that's one way also to look at how they might look at the space. But as I said at the beginning, I think the acquisition of these tech capabilities is still not that affordable as what we have seen in the case of some of the other commercially available technologies.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. I hope not to reach such space assets, but CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the American, they've been warning that satellites they actually been launched with really legacy security systems that might be vulnerable to any cyber attacks in the future. But I have another question, if I may. Let's just, if we look into the future, over the next decade, what technologies do you believe that would be exploited more by non-state actors? If we can just mention some of them, Dr. Rickley.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, so AI is there to stay, because it's like electricity. It's the technology. It's a domain in itself, and it has become a domain in itself. But it's also an enabler. So AI and AI-enabled technologies will feature high on the list. As I mentioned earlier, immersive technologies. This year you had Apple that released its Apple Vision Pro goggles that now is commercially available. Increasingly, you'll have people using this enhanced virtual immersive environment, and that leads the way to massive security issues. I read that Seoul, for instance, the city of Seoul, has spent millions of billions to reconstruct, the city in the metaverse. And think about that. On the one hand, it could be fantastic because it allows everybody to visit, virtually a foreign city. But now think about, from a terrorist perspective, think about what happened in Mumbai in 2008. A coordinated attack by terrorists in the city. Think about how this could be used to actually rehearse potential attack against the city, or to identify, the critical infrastructure, the weak points in a city by terrorists or any non-state organization or malicious actors. So there is a lot of thinking that needs to go into how this technology develop and could be used, especially from the side of malicious actors. Cognitive technologies. Technologies that are able to connect the brain directly with the machine. You know that Elon Musk has developed a company called Neuralink that develops brain-computer interface. They had the first human trial earlier this year. For now, it's not mature enough, but if you think about 10, 20 years from now, at the pace at which some of these technologies are developing, well, this could be a massive game changer. When you start to connect the brain, the human brain with the machine, think about the potential for, hacking and other things. And then a couple of times, Dr. Patel referred to, the use of proxies. My last quote for book was about surrogate warfare. And in the book, we argued that increasingly states and non-state actors are using surrogates, human surrogates, to wage war or to conduct violence on their behalf, because what Dr. Patel said, which reduces cost, reduces also political exposure. And in the book, we also consider surrogates machine. Increasingly, technology, autonomous machine will be a surrogate. So what we also have to observe quite closely is robotics, military robotics. And increasingly, we will see, machine. We will have to factor in the fact that machine could be an actor, an autonomous actor on its own, on the battlefield or to do arms.
Thank you, Dr. Clay. It's really a nightmare, with the proliferation of human brain interfaces. In the future, someone hijack your brain. So hopefully it will be not just still a fictionary scenario. I hope not. So Dr. Patel, how governments can effectively preempt and counter evolving technology threats that imposed by non-state actors?
So I think one thing that we have to understand when it comes to tackling some of these emerging technologies is that there is a fundamental recognition that has to be there on the part of the state actors that they will always be in the catch-up mode when it comes to emerging technologies. And therefore, what it means is that they have to distinguish between the reaction and response. Reaction can be ad hoc, reaction can be temporary, but the response is always planned, right? And I think that is the way to look at when it comes to tackling some of these emerging technologies and their proliferation. One way that they can do is to actually, for instance, look at creation of a multi-stakeholder model where all those elements who are involved in the development of the technology, they need to come together and devise certain principles in terms of responsibility and in terms of accountability. Look at, for instance, ChatGPT. This example is often given that, for instance, if ChatGPT had been released in a limited beta environment, would OpenAI would have been utilizing that, would have faced that kind of challenges in terms of its misuse and abuse? I think that would have reduced the possibility of the misuse and abuse, because they would have been able to take the feedback of that limited trial and then go back and devise some of the controlling mechanisms, or at least some kind of regulatory mechanisms, in terms of ensuring that this technology is now made widely available. Previously, some of my colleagues have also talked about the pandemic approach, which is the fact that during the COVID-19 pandemic, even though as we were faced with a life-threatening disease, we did not short-circuit the process of development of vaccination. We shortened the time in terms of undergoing that particular phase, but nonetheless we followed all the phases of the vaccine development. I think that is how we need to look at the technology, right? That even we cannot be taking years to develop a response. I think we need to bring our heads together and shorten our response times, and but not short circuit the process of response. That, for instance, ensure that you have certain kind of control mechanisms in terms of development of the technology, then do it in the sense of doing a limited or regulatory sandbox kind of thing, and then ensuring that it is widely or commercially available. I think we need to look at that kind of thing. That's one way. The second is the example of the nuclear technologies and nuclear proliferation has shown, that it makes sense for the like-minded partners to come together to ensure to design a certain kind of mechanism or certain kind of a regime to control the proliferation of the nuclear technology, and therefore we can also develop that kind of approach. Obviously, some would argue, and especially countries like India have argued, that those regimes were in a sense indiscriminatory. But I think there is also a lesson in that even as the like-minded states come together to develop that regime, over a period of time, they have to ensure that that regime becomes as representative as possible and does not become a club of powerful countries.
I'm afraid we don't have much time left, but Dr. Rakil and Dr. Patel, any final thoughts, closing remarks? Maybe please in 1 minute or so. So, Dr. Rakil.
Well, thank you first for having convened this this webinar. I think it was really enlightening. The purpose of this webinar is not to say that technology is bad, all right? Because this technology will allow humanity to grow dramatically. And COVID was a good example. Never in human history have we developed a vaccine that in such a short amount of time. But the issue that we have to be mindful of is that this technology is very powerful and is dual use and can be actually repurposed for malicious purposes very easily for some of them. And this is basically the key problems that international community is being faced with. It's not about banning this technology, it's about finding the right governance structure and also innovation model that will guarantee that we benefit from this technology and we do not empower actors that could use this technology for nefarious purposes.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Dr. Patel.
I would actually build on that. The fact is that these are dual-use technologies, and therefore that does not mean that we need to curtail the development of these technologies. We need to ensure, that we develop responsible mechanisms, we develop accountability, so that we can ensure, that we are able to harness this technology for positive uses. But at the same time, we also have to be mindful of the fact that there will always be some malicious actors, some rogue actors with those kind of intentions to misuse and abuse that technology, and therefore we have to develop the mechanisms to again ensure that their access to this technology is curtailed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. We reached the end of this webinar. So on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Sultan Mohammed Naimi, the Director General of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, I would like to sincerely thank Dr. Samir Patel and Dr. Jean-Marc for their time and valuable insights. Thank you so much. And thanks also to those who joined us this evening, hoping to join you again in another webinar from the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research. Thank you so much and have a good night. Thank you.